Okay guys, so welcome to this 10-minute presentation on the measurement of the extra overs on partitions. So I'm on page 122 of the ARM. I'm in floor, wall and ceiling finishes stud partitions. I'm looking at stud partition type IWS 210A and I've just measured it. It's highlighted in green. I'm not going to open up my box anymore there because it's just difficult to see. Let me see if we can get a little bit more on it. But it's tricky enough there. So you can see my shapes in there. Your viewfinder will be bigger than mine. I just want to have my ARM beside me here. I have a two-screen setup, so normally I'll have the bigger picture, my bigger drawing on my other screen, or I might have my ARM. I generally have a hard copy, which I have a hard copy right in front of me. It's easier because you can see both pages at the same time, and your employer should pay for that as part of a business expense. So extra over for all of these items here. If you look at the ARM page, the descriptions are stated there in section 3 on page 122 and in column 2. So it says extra over for angles to partitions, three-way intersection, four-way intersection, abutments to other finishes, fair ends to partitions, and then it moves on to forming openings. After that it moves on to bearers, size and type stated, function stated. They're grounds for M&E equipment. And the final thing then, labours making good and or cutting around obstructions. So we need to measure all of those. They have been identified in the bill of quantities. What you will notice in the bill of quantities is they're slightly out of sequence. So it's always better when you're following the bill not to do it from memory. Okay, this person remembers what they are, but they started for some reason with extra over for abutments to other finishes. That's the 5th item on the list. So after, if you like, if stud partitions are the first item, angles to partitions should be the second item. So we'll go in the order that it is in here, just for handiness sake. But if you look over on the left hand side, you'll see that it's actually abutments is number 5 on the list. So abutments to other finishes then. If I minimize my ARM and going forward, I'm just going to maximize this image here. This would be where there is a finish that is exposed and your stud partition is running up against it. So for example here, the question arose yesterday in this toilet in the changing areas. Are the toilets, there's a concealed cistern type toilet here where you can see the framework in there for the concealed cistern. Is this button? And it would appear that the button is, because you can see it in plan, it would appear that this concealed cistern only goes halfway or 1200 high or something like that. So then you've got in here the surface finish on this wall here, IWS 405. On one side it has a gyp liner and plaster fixed to the concrete, and on the other it's just exposed concrete. So the question would be, is that exposed concrete visible? If it's visible and the skim is butting up against it, you can't finish skim to exposed concrete in a nice way without putting a stop bead on it, a J bead or a stop bead. So there's a charge for that. There's a charge for a length of bead, there's a charge for the labour to fit the bead, and there's a charge for the slower work that is included. So your rate for your partitions will include for generally skimming across or taping and jointing depending on the description. But when you come to another finish, such as concrete, such as glass, such as timber, if it's seen, if it's exposed, then there's an item in there for abutments. And according to the ARM, that item is enumerated. Excuse me, number. So we go to our results section and we can click on number. If I go in here, just have a little look. Count is number. For some reason, they're using an Australian method. So we just count. So we're going to assume that this is a finish here, and we're going to measure it on both sides. Okay, so click and click, that gives us 2. And then we're going to look anywhere else where we see that finish, just in 210A, so not in other partitions. At the moment, we're measured by partition type. The ARM is somewhat silent as to whether you should group it by type or group all the labours together. My preference, if the partitions are the same thickness, my preference would normally be to group them together. You can see here this wall, just be careful with the drawings. Normally when you look at this partition here, it looks like it would run all the way through, but in fact it changes from 210 to 215. Possibly something to do with moisture there. Okay, so I'm just looking for other finishes. A question came in yesterday, is another stud partition type another finish? No, it's not. So it's an entirely different material. It's where you're butting up against a different material, and it's only where it's exposed. So here's an example of it butting against a material where it's not exposed. If you look at 420, 420 is a one-sided shaft wall type, although it's probably not a performance shaft wall, it's more like a boxing. Okay, it's plasterboarded on one side, and there's exposed in the inside here is just insulation against a concrete wall, and it's hidden from view. And this is full height. These are always full height, these boxings. So that partition that runs in there butts up against that insulation, but there's no need for that to be a good face. There's no need. It's only you're only measuring it when it's a good finish, when it's exposed and it's seen. I can't see any other apart from those two. If you can find others, by all means measure them. I'm now moving on to, in this case, three-way intersection, but if you look at my sequence again, I should be going angles to partitions, three-way intersection, four-way intersection. There's no reference here to angles to partitions. It could be that in this particular case the QS has decided that if they have a zero quantity, they delete the description. So what I will do first is I will just look and see, are there angles to partitions? So an angle will be an external angle. So for example, in 215B, which we're not measuring at the moment, there's an exposed corner here. See how that corner, if you can imagine, if you walk through the door, you're going to see that corner. So that needs to have a angle bead. It's a mini mesh bead that gets fitted and skimmed up to it, so you get a nice finish. The rule of thumb with skim is that it's a wet finish, and it won't give you a good finish unless you put something to stop the edge, or unless you're just running through and up. So for example, with the openings, if you have an architrave, now there's, when I look very closely, I can see that there's no architrave here. Instead, the plaster, you can actually even see the plasterboard returning there. The plasterboard returns in, and there's a corner bead on there. So we'll pick up that when it comes to our forming openings, if it's in the description. If it's not in the forming openings description, we can measure that as an angle, because that's going to be an angle. That should have been highlighted. But generally, if I look there, I don't see any other exposed corner angles for 210, so that could be the reason why it's not measured. Three-way intersections. So if I think about this stud, this is just one line. It's just one stud partition. If we have a corner, that's essentially, the angle is essentially a two-way intersection. So you have one in the y-axis and one in the x-axis. That's essentially a two-way. It's not referred to as two-way. That's why the first way series, if you like, starts with 3 and then goes to 4. So the angle is essentially another word for a two-way intersection. Three-way intersection will be the likes of this one here. So where you've got a partition, you could consider that these are just two lines, but they run in 3 different ways. So this one runs to here, then from there it branches off to here, and it also branches down to here. So that's an example of a three-way intersection. So let's measure that one. So we go in there again and count, and we'll hit that. Bang. And that's that one done. This is a bit more complicated because although it is a three-way intersection, it's a three-way intersection with another stud partition type. So we have to, the rules are silent as to where you measure it. You have to measure it at least somewhere. So I'm going to measure it here as I'm talking about it here, in case I forget later on. It's another good little practice. If you remember something, do it when you remember instead of saying to yourself, I'll get that later. Here we go again. There's another intersection here. It runs this way and this way and then this way. So you could consider that that's a three-way intersection. Okay, so we're coming to the end of our class now in this one. There is a second video. If this is part 1, so if you want to click on the link below, you should see part 2, and we can continue with this discussion then. Okay, thank you.